But the booze was out of control. I know that now. Then I just accepted it. Kids do that. Dogs too. Welcome to AMI Audiobook Review, the weekly podcast where we chat all things audiobooks. I'm your host, Ramya Amuthan, and the quote that we start with is that of Stephen King, and it's because later on we'll be discussing Fairytale by Stephen King, which is where I pulled this quote. And I really did go through a lot of quotes before choosing this one to make the point that I love Stephen King's use of similes, going from one description to another, and wondering if any of this actually makes sense. Does this have a connection? Seemingly not, but they actually do most of the time. And he has this brilliant way of passing from one thought to another without missing a beat, without trying to skip any beats or words or connectivity. And he finds the slightest of threads to then make the words move forward. And he takes us along with him, of course, if you're paying attention. And I often wonder, does he even know where he's going? Which I am convinced he does. Every phrase feels intentional when you see it on paper, because oftentimes we're listening to audiobooks and we're just taken and whisked away on this journey. But when you see it on paper through these select quotes, you think, wow, yeah, this is great. For dialogue, for thought, for description. So he says in his on writing memoir / guide to writing. Lots of great tips there and lots of sharing on his part about how he goes through it for writing. Let's move to the CELA homepage and take a glance at the featured titles, celalibrary.ca, and that's the Center for Equitable Library Access. The Story of Us by Catherine Hernandez is an LGBTQ plus fiction title that's up there. We also have Cobalt Red by Siddharth Kara, and this is a social issues pick. And the last feature title up there is In Land Without Dogs, The Cats Learn to Bark by Jonathan Garfinkel. Historical fiction for anyone who's interested in that. And we will come back with Know Your Narrator on today's episode. Sara Hillis is featuring the 2023 Audie Award winner for Best Male Narrator. This is AMI Audiobook Review, the weekly podcast where we chat all things audiobooks. And on the second episode of every month, we have Know Your Narrator with Sara Hillis. We basically shout out the voices behind our favorite listens, and we get to know the fascinating lives and backgrounds and interesting approaches to reads by these narrators. And Sara, this month, along with next month, and maybe we'll go down this road a little further. But for now, you kind of have a themed approach for Know Your Narrator.
Yeah, well, this will be 2 months because there are 2 for this year. But we're doing the winners of the Best Narrator categories of the Audie Awards, which were held on March 28th, 2023 in New York. And this is an industry event from the Audio Publishers Association, and it recognizes a lot of different categories, but the ones we're interested here in are the Best Male Narrator and the Best Female Narrator. Mm-hmm. They still only have those 2 categories. They haven't done anything about that, but there you go. Yeah.
Amazing. Okay, so you want to start with male? Female?
Yeah, we're going to do the best male this time around because I know his work the best. Okay. Basically, that's the only reason. Seth Numrich is the guy. And he narrated Fairytale by Stephen King, which you might remember I recommended in the New Year's edition or whatever of the audiobook review podcast. It's a really great book on its own. Seth does a great job narrating, and I had never come across him before until reading that book. And there's a good reason for that. Because as far as Audible's concerned anyway, he's only narrated 5 books in about 8 or 9 years.
Wow.
So not because he, I'm sure, doesn't want to do it. He's just a very, very busy actor. He's got a lot of irons in the fire, as it were. So, But yeah, he looks like he's only worked with Simon & Schuster Audio as far as I can tell. I don't know if he did anything voluntarily like for the blindness organizations or anything like that. Before that, I have no clue on that score myself. But so he seems to tend to narrate sort of first person books. He started with a memoir in 2012 called Honor Bound, which is about remember the Amanda Knox case? She and her Italian partner were, they were thought to have committed murders, and they were convicted, but then they hadn't done it, and it was a big thing back a while ago. So that was called Honor Bound, and it was by the guy.
Okay.
And then he's done some other sort of gothic type stories, a little bit of science fiction. Which and these two Stephen King novels that I've read later, which was in 2021, and Fairytale, which was in 2022.
You think it would come to happen that Seth becomes the narrator of future Stephen King books?
That would be kind of amazing. The way Simon & Schuster works, I don't think it's going to happen because they just keep picking different people for different stories.
Okay. Wait, so give us some of the highlights of Fairytale. Like you said, first person, that is the pattern for Fairytale as well?
Yeah, Fairytale is a sort of 22-year-old guy looking back on his teenage years and his early childhood a bit too. But the main story takes place when he's about 17. And so Seth brings this sort of youthful note to, he's in his 30s now, but he brings a sort of youthful sound to that novel. You can kind of believe that that's a 22-year-old kid telling the story. And when he's a younger teenager, you can also kind of hear that in his voice too, like when he's using dialogue and things like that.
But it's the thought, right? I think the internal thought that he does really well.
Yeah, he really gets into the characters' heads. I think with both Later and Fairytale, he's able to show you the space in which these people, usually Stephen King's conceit with these first-person novels is that they're kind of writing them as therapy. They're kind of writing them to say, this is what really happened.
Right.
And you might not believe me, but this is what really happened kind of thing. And so he gets into the psychological headspace, I think, of the actual narrative voice, as well as the character in the story too. Like, it's kind of neat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, his tone, because you mentioned youthful, I would definitely say his tone sounds very young, not like some of the seasoned pros that we've talked about in past Know Your Narrator segments. And I don't know, there's something different about exactly what you said, the actual books that they choose for him. They seem very specific, or like have a very specific vibe, and it might be exactly what you're talking about. It sounds like he's reading his own journal entries, which is very different than, a multi-character and third-person style reading where you're throwing in many character voices and different experiences and emotions. It's kind of a different process.
Yeah, I think so, because I think if you have a single narrative voice, and it's not the omniscient third-person narrator either, like it's one person's, and it's supposed to be that person that's quote unquote writing the book, right? Or
exactly
the manuscript or whatever they're doing, right? Yeah, it's a very different thing. I mean, you see in Stephen King's books like this, I might have spelled that word wrong, or I have to fix, like he'll even say that this is not a real, finished product. The writer, the quote unquote writer, is writing as he goes, kind of thing, and it's very not journalistic, but journal-like.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, so give us more information on his background, his growing up, the influences around his narration, whatever you have.
Yeah, so he was born in 1987 in Minneapolis, Minnesota. His dad, Charles, was an actor. And Seth says, most of these things I get are actually from actor interviews. I don't have any narrator interviews, which is really sad. I hope we get some in the near future. It's just been too soon after the awards, I think. But anyway, he said that when his dad was performing, I don't know if this was in live performances or just in rehearsal, but Seth would kind of get up and steal the scenes, as he would put it. He really wanted to be in the center of attention. He really wanted to be an actor from a very early age. He would say. And he studied at Juilliard, which is like the school, right? The famous acting school in New York. And I suppose there's the Actors Studio too, but Juilliard is like the big one that people talk about a lot for acting and music and things. And then basically right out of school, I think he just started getting theater work, off Broadway, on Broadway. Took him a while to get onto Broadway, but yeah, he's done a ton of theater. You can tell he really loves the theater, the whole ethos of the theater. A lot sort of different from, I would say, some of our narrators who are maybe a little more, I don't know, they've been around a little longer. They're like, you know what, I really love this narrating thing because I don't have to, project my voice so much, and I don't have to work with all these other people that get their lines wrong, and they'll a lot of them will say that. Yeah. But Seth is clearly, he's like, I will work as long as they let me work. That's kind of how he's viewing it. In terms of things like TV, he's done a couple TV things. He was in Turn, Washington's Spies, so that's kind of a Revolutionary War thing from AMC, American Movie Classics, as it used to be called. And I never watched that show, but I remember it being on. And he was in Homeland too. He played, I think he was kind of like if I remember the character correctly, he was a CIA kind of agent guy that then gets shot up and has to sort of deal with a brain injury and stuff. Oh. And if I'm thinking of the right, there were so many characters in that show. I was going to say. But he was in that in the later seasons of it. And he's done a few movies which I don't know. I don't know them at all. But he's got acclaim for those things. Well, clearly he's been
busy. Sorry, go ahead.
He really seems like narrating is something that comes up every so often, and I don't know if he gets to pick like the stories. Maybe that's what maybe he does. Maybe he gets to pick the stories because but yeah, it's sort of a thing that happens every so often, and then he does it, and then he goes back to what he seems to truly, truly, truly love, which is the theater.
The theater. Yeah. That comparison is still quite deep for me because of just the sample size of narrators we've talked about and how they've always expressed in interviews and whatever you were able to find that transition, that transformation, that liking of narration. I wouldn't say over theater, but they're able to like channel some of the things that they've taken on from theater over the years and through their backgrounds and put it into narration and then say, I love doing it that way, right? But with Seth, it sounds like he's still working through his bucket list of things that he wants theater-wise.
Oh, yeah. He has tons of dream roles he still wants to do. He's like, he has this weird idea. I can't even imagine it, but this weird idea of wanting someone to stage a version of Dante's Divine Comedy, which is all metaphysical and crazy. And how could you possibly do that? But I think he wanted to be Dante. Like he wanted to be the character in that.
Maybe the same way he does his narration, right? Like that whole first person thought process.
Yeah, well, how does Dante, in the middle of my life, I lost my way in a dark wood kind of thing, right? Yeah, like it's very, it's very first person.
It's very monologue. That would be interesting to watch. Okay, and there's something about the Welsh dialect.
Yeah, he really likes, I can't even try to do it for you, but I'm learning Welsh on Duolingo, but
okay.
He really likes
good timing.
Working in dialects, right? Because he thinks it's kind of like putting on a mask and sort of letting it kind of frees you up. You kind of once you get the dialect down. He's played English characters before, and in different dialects, like the Devon dialect, which is like "Hello, I'm from Devon," very almost like pirate talk, but not quite. And then, he'd really love to do the Welsh dialect, a little bit of the Welsh, because it would be really great for him to I can't do it, but I always get Irish on me. But he would love to work in a play, like, say, I don't know, like The Corn is Green or one of these Welsh plays that he didn't say The Corn is Green. I just picked one. But he would really like to do the Welsh dialect. He studied it at school, but he never got to perform it yet. So he likes dialect, and he shows that in this narration too. He'll use dialect. He did an English dialect for, like, he was reading a Guardian review of a book in Later, and of course the Guardian's basically a British newspaper, and so when he read the review, he adopted this sort of English style of reading it,
Just like subtle choices here and there, right? Like, I was hearing some of the samples of his work and thinking, okay, it's pretty straightforward. Like, his performance is pretty, and of course it depends on the content too. Like, it's a Stephen King book. Everything sounds eerie, from the descriptions of the settings to, like, the things that the characters will find. But I guess some of the choices he makes, it does bring out the theater in him.
Yeah, like I think he knows how to adapt his tone to what he's doing, like most good narrators know. Like, you've got your narrative voice, which is pretty straight usually, unless you're talking about giant cockroaches, like in Stephen King, or or very crazy other things.
Does he yell and scream, like in parts that are dramatic?
Not in the narrative voice, I would say. Like, I think of 11/22/63 with Craig Wasson doing the narrating, and when he's reading a harrowing scene, he kind of almost starts like, it's like he's trying to not to cry as he's reading it, and I'm like, okay, it's a little much for me. But I really like that book. But so no, he doesn't do a lot of that. It's more in the dialogue. He will get and yelling and screaming, no, because that's not good for your voice. But you know what I mean. Performance.
Yes. Okay. All right, that's interesting. Let's keep with that. The style of reading, the approach to reading, his tone of reading, which we've covered a lot of already. But what would you say was the progress of his reading? Has he talked about that? Have you found much on it?
You mean the process?
Process as well, but like the progress from when he first started reading. Has he said anything about the development side of it, or how he approaches reads?
I must admit, I have nothing directly on narration for him, but his acting, he has said in interviews that he really likes when a writer, a playwright that is, can bring a character to life really well, so it kind of leaps off the page. And I would say that would go for his use of narration of books as well, because if you know what the character is trying to be in the words and the actions that the narrator chooses, it's easier for you to embody that character, on stage or in your voice or whatever, right? So he likes that. He really likes artists. He likes to emulate the artists around him that stay grounded and like to find truth. So I think even in the most fantastic story of Stephen King, as if you're a Stephen King fan, you'll know that there's a lot of truth in those stories. There's a lot of truth about the human condition and character motivations and such. And so I think, those are very good choices for him to do, because he can find that truth in the midst of all the crazy monsters and whatever else that come up.
That's an interesting point, right? Like bringing the realism into the story. Like when we talk sci-fi, fantasy, whatever Stephen King is, like the match of horror with everything else, imagination. Sometimes there tends to be this resistance for people to check out books like this, maybe. And maybe some of this I'm speaking for myself, actually, because we're thinking, I don't know if I can relate, or I don't know if I can really believe in this experience that the character is going through. So I think the narrator can honestly bring that to the table, make you think that this is something real, even if it is just full of fantasy and imagination, right? Like the narrator has the power to bring you into that world and make you believe in the writing.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And like just for Stephen King and Seth's, working with his books, there's this, like Stephen King has always said, you have to go very sort of slowly in a sense, but also not too slowly, but very slowly into the weirdness.
Yes.
So that the weirdness comes out of the thing you've already been reading. So
Exactly.
it almost doesn't jar you, but it jars you, but it jars you in a kind of comfortable, but you're like ready to jump into the pool or something because little things have seemed odd through the whole story, right? And I think Seth does a very good job of pointing the oddities up. It later is, I'm spoiling a bit, but later is about a kid that sees dead people, and it's not like The Sixth Sense. It's a bit different, but he starts off saying, "Well, Mr. and Mrs. So and so were standing outside their door," and it was only a few seconds later, you realize that Mrs. So and so isn't in fact alive. But he doesn't start by saying, "I saw dead people," right? It's really subtle, right?
Yeah. I'm totally getting chills. I love discussing things like this, that very thoughtful, intentional writing, and knowing that, this is the effect that this is going to have on the reader. So how to maximize that, or how to go into that trusting process with the reader. Stephen King is so good at that. I mean, there are books that I've read by him and I'm just like, when did I invest in this? Like, at what point during the book did I say, oh my goodness, I'm there with you, man?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh man, that's awesome. How about Seth's ability to trust the process, or trust the book, or kind of go through it? Does he say anything about that?
Yeah, I have nothing directly on his narration, but he does say, interestingly, for acting, he gets really nervous during auditions, but then once he's done all his whatever you do as an actor to get ready, right? Once he's ready to perform the role, he doesn't have very many nerves at all. And he says he thinks that's weird, but that's like, he thinks that's not the person's usual way of doing it. But I guess he feels like once he internalizes things, I guess that's what he probably does. He kind of internalizes it in a way that it's able to come out of him kind of more naturally, perhaps.
Yeah.
So I would say, personally, I mean, this is a total speculation on my part, but I would say that if he's reading a book, he's going to do the same kind of thing. He's going to take it into himself, and in whatever methods he does, I wish I knew them because I think they're interesting.
Right.
But and then sort of spin it back out as the narrator in a flowing kind of way, or as flowing as you can get in a recording studio when things go wrong or whatever.
Now, you did have one piece from him directly about his narration, and that was during the acceptance speech at the Audies.
Yeah, he actually said, it was a real privilege and pleasure to narrate Stephen King's words, because he loves the use of language, because Stephen King does have an awesome use of language, and because he reads all the time, right? Stephen King reads everything.
Yes.
Everything.
Yes, he does.
And so, and he sort of jokingly, he said, it was a privilege to narrate Stephen's work. And he went, well, wait a minute, we're not on a first name basis, So you can kind of tell that he's a fanboy. It's funny because on stage interviews, they're like, well, who are your favorite writers? And he's like, oh, I like Walt Whitman and Gabriel Garcia Marquez and all these really sort of, I don't know, highfalutin kind of literary figures. But then I totally know he reads Stephen King. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Fantastic. I mean, it seems like he's quite ready for the challenge. He is younger. He is newer. He is still much more involved, or has a lot to continue doing in the theater/TV/big screens realm. But, there's so much potential here. So I think you mentioned this already, but winning the Audies is probably another big kickoff point for him.
Yeah, I wonder I just don't know what's going to come of this. I think it will be interesting to watch, because I haven't seen such a new narrator, really, not new, but a a narrator who's only narrated about 5 books get an audio award. I don't think I have.
Yeah, that is interesting, actually. Yeah, I mean, we'll see where it goes, but good reasons, as we pointed out through this conversation, as to why he deserves the award, and obviously,
I was so happy. I was really happy.
Yay! I know it was your recommendation. So awesome. Any quick thoughts before we let you go?
Well, next month we're going to talk about Rosamund Pike, who is redoing the Wheel of Time series by Robert Jordan. She's in the actual show on Amazon Prime. So I guess I have to start reading them now. Oh no.
Yeah, can't just stick to the Amazon Prime part of it. Oh, 14 books. Oh my goodness, that's like almost Amr level. Sara, thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem.
Sara Hillis is joining us for Know Your Narrator, second episode of the month. You can hang out for this session. And there you go. You get a teaser of what may come next month as well, or will come at least. I'm Ramya Amuddin, host of AMI Audiobook Review. Our technical producer, Nisreen Abdelmajid, this week with the assistance of Jacob Szymanski. And until the next episode of this podcast, happy audiobook listening.